One of the original deaths in the Marvel Universe. Before writers used character deaths to make a point or add shock value to their own stories, this was considered to be one of the most shocking deaths in Marvel history besides the death of Jean Grey. I remember reading a fantastic internet article on the subject years ago, and I'm hoping that this comic book discussion will help recreate that feeling for all listening now. Just a little backstory for those who are not exactly familiar with the whole circumstances. Gwen Stacy was the original love interest for Peter Parker before Mary Jane Watson. It was considered one of the key relationships in the Marvel Universe, along with Reed Richards and Susan Storm, Scott Summers and Jean Grey, Bruce Banner and Betty Ross. Leading up to the fateful event, Norman Osborn had a whole host of problems: financial, social, and stress. At the time, through circumstances, he forgot that he was the Green Goblin, but with a snap of his mind, he remembered who he was and blamed Spider-Man for all his problems, and lures Spider-Man to either the Brooklyn Bridge as depicted in the art or the George Washington Bridge as given in the text. Originally, Stan Lee thought it was the George Washington Bridge, but the artist actually had it as the Brooklyn Bridge. Later versions of the story call it the Brooklyn Bridge. During the battle between Spider-Man and the Goblin, he actually throws her off the bridge while Peter uses his webbing to save her. Later learning that she died, he swears revenge, and the Goblin dies by being impaled on his own glider. Such a graphic method of death at the time considered it to be the end of the happy-go-lucky Silver Age of comic books, and the start of the gritty Bronze Age of comics. With all of the details known, let's get into what actually killed Gwen. The discussion, I remember, had it being a poll with multiple choices given, and you had to explain and defend your argument after you voted for the poll. Simple. I know many of you listening have your own opinions as well. See which one fits most similar to yours and debate it. Choice number 1. Shock. In the actual circumstances leading up to the battle, there isn't much dialogue from Gwen. One argument I remember was that Gwen was shocked enough from seeing both Spider-Man and the Green Goblin fight. It actually put her into a weakened state, so when the Goblin threw her off the bridge, she died because of the shock of it all. She died because all of the shock affecting her. Realistically, that's actually possible. The shock weakened her, and everything else, including the webbing and fall, just made things worse. Gary Conway himself said that Gwen died from the shock on the way down before the neck break happened. Choice number 2. The Green Goblin. Besides shock, it was Norman Osborn who kidnapped Gwen Stacy and brought her to the bridge. Osborn threw her off the bridge. He used Gwen as bait to lure Peter out for that final battle, and she was a casualty of that battle. For those who did not want to think that Spider-Man was the reason why Gwen Stacy died, it's the most common choice. Peter didn't kill Gwen, the Goblin did. Choice number 3. Gwen's fall. We need to be honest. Gwen died because of what happened. How did it happen? She was thrown off the bridge. That's what killed her. The argument there is that the moment Osborn threw Gwen off the bridge, her fate was sealed. It did not matter what happened after that, or the circumstances. The Green Goblin himself said the fall from that height would have killed her as well. Choice number 4. The neck break. The most infamous of all the choices, and the one that people mostly referred to. After the Goblin threw her off, Spider-Man tried to save her. Without thinking, he used the webbing to grab her before she hit the water. However, the decision to grab her ankle actually caused her whole body to jerk, and it tragically snapped her neck. A lot of people said around that time that it was Spider-Man's own inexperience which led to Gwen's death. Maybe if he used the webbing to grab her waist, her neck wouldn't have snapped because the impact would have been distributed through her body more evenly, thus not giving her a result for her body to jerk and Gwen's neck not to snap. This is actually the official way she died as well. This was so traumatic to Spider-Man that in the future, whenever someone was thrown off or fell from a high point, Peter would actually dive after them, grab them, then use webbing to anchor onto a point and use his own body to absorb the shock and inertia rather than letting the normal person take the impact. Because Peter's body is stronger than a normal person's and can take damage better. I personally think that if Peter dived after Gwen and used this way of stopping her fall, she might have lived. But then again, at the time, Spider-Man was inexperienced, arguably, which led to him using the webbing on her leg. Choice number 5. The sudden stop. An interesting choice, and one that I partially agree with. It was not any of the other choices, but the fact that once Gwen was thrown off the bridge, she was going at a certain speed, and by the time that Spider-Man's webbing had grabbed her leg, she was more than halfway down the bridge. From the artwork shown, that must have been quite a distance in speed, with Peter's webbing stopping her, equivalent to someone falling off a building and the ground impact. It's not the impact, but the sudden stop. Basic physics. For those who would support the idea, it throws out the idea that any webbing would have saved her. Neck, ankle, arm, waist. It doesn't matter. Grabbing onto a person at any point from that speed might kill them with a sudden stop. Afterthoughts. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's pretty clear that Gwen's neck was broken when Spider-Man snagged her with his webbing. When the Green Goblin said the words to the effect of, "The fall alone would have killed her," he was just giving his own psychotic opinion of things. I fail to see how that can be considered as a genuine reason for Gwen's death when compared against the fact that there was a snap phrase bubble drawn next to her neck. Plus, isn't there something horribly disturbing with the way Gwen's head is lying back in the panel after Peter has saved her? She died of a broken neck as a result of the rapid deceleration caused by Spider-Man snagging her with his web line. As with other choices, it's pure physics. It can be said that back in the early 1970s, the writers didn't want to come out and say one way or another how exactly she died. They preferred to leave it to open opinion, perhaps due to the extraordinary backlash, both positive and negative, that occurred from the death. But if you look at the original panels, I doubt there was much room for speculation or theories. I do say that it's not 100% proven, but it's irrefutable to object much when you see the comic panels yourself. Also, in later years, some people used the snap was just a random onomatopoeia to show the action, as in thwip for web spinning, or swick for the sound of web making contact with Gwen's leg, and snap was to show the tension of the webbing kickback. If the snap sound effect was supposed to be the noise of the web line becoming caught with Gwen's weight, then why isn't the sound effect placed near the web line at her leg? The snap is right next to Gwen's neck. As Spider-Man is bringing her up, her head looks at an awkward angle. Upon further looking at the actual snap, it's a small icon. Very shocking and chilling. A simple snap killed Gwen. If the death was redone in modern comics, it would be large and eye-catching. Back then, the stories relied on good writing, so a simple snap was all that was needed. Such a thing would no longer be enough these days, arguably. Also, having the icon written smaller illustrates that it wasn't a loud noise, and that's why Spider-Man had no idea that Gwen was already dead when he hauled her back up. The sound effect of Gwen's neck breaking is there for the audience to hear only. Let's imagine how it was at the time. As a result of the fan backlash at the time from killing one of the main characters of the Spider-Universe, Marvel later backed away from the concept. They couldn't just say Peter accidentally broke Gwen's neck from the fall using the webbing to catch her and the shock of the fall was the fatal factor. It's easy to imagine the original tragic story was glossed over in an attempt to play it safe, although at first Marvel censored it arguably. Information says that if you read The Amazing Spider-Man right after Gwen died up until around the end of the 1970s, whenever the death of Gwen was referred to, it was said that she died from the shock of the fall, and the neck snap occurred after she was dead. Due to the dark and nasty tone of 1980s comics, Marvel decided to come out with the truth and say that Gwen died from a broken neck caused by Peter. As a result of this has become the acknowledged cause of death. All in all, no matter what, Gwen Stacy would have died anyway. It doesn't matter who or what the circumstances. That's how tragic and great the story was. I would say that the best adaptation was in Spider-Man the Animated Series episode Turning Point, in which was a variation of the death of Gwen Stacy's story. Osborn kidnaps Mary Jane and goads Peter into chasing him. They battle atop the bridge, and the Goblin throws some pumpkin bombs. The bombs force MJ to trip over the side of the bridge and fall. However, the portal technology catches Mary Jane and she's thrown into another dimension. Peter thinks she fell into the water and tries to find her. Thinking she's dead, Peter nearly goes insane with rage, shouting that it's going to be the end of one of them, as after getting out of the water, Peter clings to the side of the bridge and leaps onto the glider as the Goblin passes by. At that moment, the glider malfunctions and goes down. The Goblin and Spider-Man fight. Osborn says that they'll both be killed. Peter doesn't care anymore. as long as Mary Jane is avenged. The glider crashes along the side of the river and the portal technology opens one final portal. Osborn is about to be sucked into the portal as Spider-Man can cling to the ground. Peter actually pushed Osborn so he was partially inside of the portal. Holding onto an escape ladder, the portal pulls the mask off the Goblin and the persona shifts to Norman. Begging for help, Peter decides not to be a murderer like the Goblin is, just like in the comics. Swinging by with webbing, Peter is about to grab Norman's hand when at the last moment the Goblin's persona finally overwhelms Norman once and for all, as the Goblin uses a remote control to activate the glider to attack Spider-Man in a final charge. Spider-Man swings out of the way and at the last moment the glider impales the Goblin, sending him through the portal as you can hear the Goblin's final cry as the portal technology malfunctions and it closes. Spider-Man stands victorious, but both the Goblin and Mary Jane are dead for a lack of a better word. Utterly brilliant and fantastic considering how everything was. I don't think a better adaptation can be done unless you literally have a cartoon with Peter and Gwen, the character development between them, and finally the death. Later on, when I started to read the comics and learn where the cartoon got its inspiration from, I learned that it was spot on. Mary Jane falling off the bridge, just like Gwen. Spider-Man quickly using webbing to grab her. The webbing grabs Gwen's leg and the effect kills her. The series had Mary Jane falling into a portal, an idea from a previous story arc. Both in the comic and series, Peter is devastated and vows revenge against the Goblin. The comic had Osborn dying in an alley, while the cartoon had him dying on a cove. The comic had Norman being impaled. Since you can't do this in any cartoon, the glider hit him and knocked him into the final portal he opened. Same thing, or an equivalent. For years afterward in the comics, Peter was haunted by what happened that night. In the cartoon, Peter was haunted for about the rest of the season. Same thing, or an equivalent. That was more than 40 years ago now. Times have changed. No doubt readers at the time would have considered her to be Peter's one true love. Now people view Mary Jane as Peter's one true love. I think it's a generational divide. I consider them both to be equally important, because after Gwen died, Mary Jane comforted Peter over his loss and that's how their relationship began. Comment. I want to hear what people thought of the death, what they thought of the exact circumstances, the legacy, and the adaptations of it.